Bayshore. Some call it the backside of East Coast.
The backside of nowhere.
The ruder ones will call it the poor man's Tanjong Ru. But with Vela Bay potentially coming in at 3,000 per square feet, you gotta be a pretty rich man to buy it. Jokes aside, if you're considering Vela Bay at almost 3,000 per square feet, that's almost double that of the average in that area at this point in time. Now, does that make any sense at all? That's what I wanted to figure out. I analyzed 552 transactions across 26 different developments, looking at actual returns, unit types, and holding periods. The data revealed two patterns that I think are worth considering before making a decision. First, some of the older developments at lower entry prices are actually yielding higher returns. Second, two-bedders are actually outperforming three-bedders. We've also put all that data into our back-tested exit strategy framework. In this video, I'll break down both patterns as well as our exit strategy framework and what that means for anyone considering Vela Bay. And before we dive into that, I wanted to give some context on how we came up with 3,000 PSF for Vela Bay. Let's take a look. So what I've done was to pull together all the transactions for the projects that were launched in 2025 and 2026. 2026 being just Nara residences so far. What we have is the land cost for those projects, the edge property break even, the average PSF sold, then at launch, and from there we were able to calculate the percentage markup that the developers had over their land cost as well as their HPROP estimated break even. So we've averaged this markup for both the land cost as well as their break even over all the developments in the OCR, RCR, and the CCR, and we have this percentage. We then take this percentage and multiply it to the land cost of the upcoming launch as well as the estimated break even cost over there, right? So you can see the Bayshore over here. Vela Bay's land cost is $1,388. The HPROP estimated break even is $2,343. So from there we calculate, assuming they use a similar average markup as all the other developers from 2025 to 2026, they should land on about 3,251, right, based on the markup. If we calculate it based on the average markup from HPROP break even, we should land on about 3,000 PSF, and that was how we got that figure. Now let's dive right into it. So remember when I said early on in the video there were two patterns that we observed. First being there were some of the older 99-year developments that were outperforming the newer 99-year ones. There were also that the two-bedders were outperforming the three-bedders. Let's take a look, right? So these were all the developments that we analyzed. I analyzed across 3 MRT stations, right? 1 km within those 3 MRT stations. There were Bayshore, Siglap, and Bedok South, right? That means one stop after and one stop before Bayshore MRT, okay? And so these were all the developments that we've put in together. So for the one-bedders, you can see, okay? So for the one-bedders, my reference for the newer 99 really is Seaside Residences over at Siglap MRT. So you see over here, in terms of the one-bedders, Seaside Residences underperforms their neighbours by quite a fair bit. Direct neighbours like Laguna Green, as well as neighbours like Bayshore Park, Mandarin Gardens, that is their immediate neighbours, right, which is one of the trends that we noticed at the start, okay? Now, for two-bedders, Seaside does a little bit better. You see they land somewhere over here, but yet, you know, not really in the average, right? They were ranked somewhere around here at 4%. Again, losing out to some of their older 99-year counterparts, places like Costa del Sol, again, Laguna Green, Villa Marina, right? They then do a little bit better than the Bayshore, Mandarin Gardens, and Bayshore Park. So somewhere in the middle, right? It is in the bigger units that we see them starting to come up in terms of performance a little bit more, especially in the three-bedders. You can see over here, you see Seaside now coming all the way up to 5% annualized, being ranked nearer to the top, right? Losing out only to Laguna Park and Bayshore, Villa Marina, these ones, right? But starting to beat out a lot of their other 99-year counterparts, and even beating out Fernwood Towers, that is freehold, Parbury Hill, that is freehold, okay? So for the four-bedders, not the most reflective, as Seaside Residences only had one four-bedder transaction. But if you look over here, they still yielded almost $1.1 million in profit. Now, what does that mean for you as a buyer? Based on the data, there's a high chance that the smaller the unit you buy, especially in a newer 99 years condo, there's a higher chance that you underperform your peers. So you really should look at your entry quantums, and for all you know, you might be able to buy one level up. For example, if your budget is at a 1-bedder in a newer 99 years condo, you could very well buy a 2-bedder or maybe even a 3-bedder in a slightly older 99 years development. Now, you really then got to look at the data to see, does that make more sense for you, depending if you're looking for own stay or for investment. I'm just going to give you an example over here. If you see seaside residences, the average 1-bedder is at about $1.2 million. That's going to give you a return of about 2.1% annualized. If you look at for the same price, you could get something like either a Bayshore Park or a Mandarin Gardens that can yield you close to 3 or 3.1% annualized. Now onto the second pattern that we noticed, which is that the 2-bedders were seemingly outperforming the 3-bedders. Now let's dive deeper into the data to see if that is really true. So we've ranked the 2-bedder returns based on who has the highest returns to the lowest returns, and you notice that there are a couple of outliers that have really pulled the results up significantly, and that impacts the data a lot because the 2-bedder transactions at 173 is significantly higher than that for the 3-bedders at 234, making, higher than normal outliers like that. They will have a higher impact on the eventual data. So to really see if this pattern holds true, what I prefer to do is to take a look at some of the larger developments with higher number of transactions and to see the results, right? So the higher of the transactions, essentially those with double-digit transactions, okay? Laguna Green, 2-bedders 4.8%, 3-bedders 4.6%. If you take a look at that, then it is true that the 2-bedders in Laguna Green is outperforming the 3-bedders, okay? We could also take a look at seaside residences, and this perhaps is going to give us the best indication for Vela Bay, because it being the youngest 99 years in that area, okay? So the 2-bedders, seaside residences 4%, but once you look at the 3-bedders, that comes up to 5%. So not true for seaside residences, okay? If you take a look at the Bayshore, 2-bedders 3.9%. Once you come up to the 3-bedders, that bumps up to 5.3%, okay? Mandarin Gardens, 2-bedders 3.1%, 3-bedders same at 3.1%, and lastly Bayshore Park, 2-bedders at 3%, but when you look at the 3-bedders, that comes up to 4%. Now, having dived deeper into the data, that pattern doesn't seem to hold true once you take a look at the developments with a higher number of transactions. Perhaps the most relevant to anyone looking at Vela Bay perhaps is the performance over at seaside residences that has shown that the 2-bedders still underperform the 3-bedders. And now that we've seen the data and patterns, it's time to analyze them. We've put them all into our exit strategy framework. This framework utilizes our close to 10 years of experience, having helped over 100 families maximize their property move. And we've also backtested these results with the launches from 2018. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to compare Vela Bay against the other developments in the Bayshore vicinity, as well as the launches from last year and this year. If you'd like to find out in detail why and how we created the exit strategy framework, just click on somewhere on this video or down in the description. So what is the exit strategy framework? Now, everyone hopes to make money from their property purchases, or at the very least, not lose money. So to do that, we focus on 3 things: supply, demand, and gaps. We break down demand and supply into 3 data points and give it a score, the exit score. And we try to find sweet spots by analyzing the gaps in the transactions, and we give it a score, the gap score. So let's get right down into it. So this is the exit strategy framework for Vela Bay. We first off have prices in terms of PSF. We've explained this earlier, how we derive this. As for the size of the units, these are just estimates. We don't have the exact unit yet, but of course, once the details are out, we could just simply update this accordingly. And from there, we have the expected quantums of the units, okay? So the first data point that we like to use is average profitability per annum, which was what we used early on in the video to kind of gauge the performances between the different condominiums. Why we like to use this is, number one, it equalizes different unit sizes across one another, and also equalizes holding periods, right? So straightforward, there's just one simple data point that allows you to compare across different unit types. Next is that it is a best indication of demand for a particular area or unit type. Quite simply, the higher the demand for a particular unit type or particular area, the higher the profitability, because it's just easier to sell and allows the owners to yield a higher profit. The lower the demand, takes longer time to sell, owners make less profit. Now that we have the data point for demand sorted, let's take a look at supply. And for supply, we look at both current units for sale as well as the total supply of units. The total supply of units, we get it from our previous sheet, where we sum up all the units that were built in the area of consideration. And so for the units for sale, we take a look at this app that we have, okay? So for here, we have all our filters. So we take a look at 3 different MRT stations. We have Bayshore, Bedok South, as well as Siglap MRT within 1 km of the MRT. So over here, we can see for the 1-bedders, the prices range from 799,000 all the way up to 1.68 million. So where are the supply coming from? We have 47 units over at Echo, just 5 at Bayshore Park, 10 at Mandarin Gardens. The other big one is 35 units coming from Seaside Residences, and over there we see prices ranging from basically 1 million to 1.68 million. For the supply of 2-bedders, we have 146 listings in total with 2,310 units built. So the bulk of the supply, we're just going to zoom into the bulk of the supply. Of course, we have ranges of prices ranging from 925,000 all the way to 2.58 million. Okay, so I see a lot of supply coming in at Bayshore Park and the Bayshore. This is perhaps relevant to anyone looking at Vela Bay because they are right next door. You have prices at 1.18 million to 1.4 million, not as low as what I thought they would be considering how old the developments are. Similarly at the Bayshore, 1.19 million to 1.59 million. Let's take a look then at Seaside Residences, that is also extremely relevant to you looking at Vela Bay because they are most similar in terms of tenure. So 21 listings over there ranging from 1.5 million to 2.58 million. So we do this across all the unit types, and we take that number and divide that by the number of units that were built, and that gives us the supply ratio. You tend to want to aim for as low a supply ratio as you can, which means that as a function of all the units that were built, there were just not that many units for sale. And on that note, we noticed that the supply ratio over at the Bayshore Vela Bay area is higher than that as compared to the other developments that we have analyzed so far. I boil that down to the fact that there's just a lot more older, larger 99 years developments in this area, and these developments tend to have a higher number of units for sale for multiple reasons, such as owners retiring, people turning around their investments, people having concerns about the lease decay. And this brings me back to the earlier part of the video where we talked about how some of these older 99 years development have actually achieved higher annualized gains as compared to their younger 99-year counterparts. But you do then have to note that when you come to selling, it may potentially take a longer time to sell with more competition. Well, on the other hand, if you take a look at Seaside Residences, the larger the unit type you go, the lower the supply. So I thought it's important to give the audience a little bit of context behind the nuances of the data. Because if you take a look at the demand data, the profitability data, this area still does pretty well as compared to the other areas that we have analyzed. But it is the supply data that is pulling the exit scores down. And if you stay on to the later part of this video, we're going to compare this exit score with the other launches both from this year as well as last year. Now, moving on to the gap score. To analyze the gap score, we pull in the average, median and highest surrounding transacted quantums as well as PSS for all the unit types. We then compare that with the expected sale price that we're gonna get. Right. So similarly for the gap score, you try to aim for as low a number as possible. And if you've taken a look at some of the other areas such as the River Valley area, or if you move closer to the Amber side where there's a lot of older, larger freehold developments, you potentially can get a negative gap score. So when you have a gap score like that, it shows that the entry price that you are looking to enter at for Vela Bay is quite a fair bit higher higher than that of the surrounding. So does this come as a surprise to me? The answer is no, because again, the area is dominated by a lot of older 99-year developments. So now that we've seen the data and exit strategy framework for Vela Bay, it still doesn't really answer the question, how does Vela Bay compare to the other launches? For that, we've consolidated all the scores into one sheet and we'll share that with you later on in the video. So other than the data side to things, the qualitative considerations to your purchase is also very important, and I'm going to put all that up onto the screen. And especially for the District 15, District 16 area where Vela Bay is located at, having very clear objectives in terms of your holding period is important. Why do I say that? Because you have a lot of options available to you. If you've seen the data, some of the older 99-year developments are performing as well as the newer 99-year developments. So which should you pick? So for example, if you have a lower budget, you don't want to spend all that much, you're happy just looking to buy a place in District 15, District 16, you can opt for some of the older 99-year developments. I would say the old 99-year developments in District 15 and District 16 alone have kind of debunked the myth of lease decay. They are still doing really well. So they represent a very good value for money alternative to live in the District 15 to District 16 area. However, they might have some issues when you try to sell it in the future. It might take some time due to their supply. On the other hand, if you are not looking to stay for all that long, you want to keep some flexibility, make sure that it's easy to sell, you might opt for the more expensive younger 99-year developments. While they are more expensive, the data has also gone to show that their supply is not that high and they are still equally profitable as the older 99-year development. So at the end of the day, it's just to be very clear with your plans so that you choose the right property for you. If you need help with all of this, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you out. Or you found the data and research that we have done helpful and interesting and would like to check it out, feel free to drop us a text. We're happy to share with you. So if you enjoyed the video so far, have benefited in one way or another, and appreciate the amount of work that we put into our research and data, we'll be really thankful if you hit that like and subscribe button as you help out the channel a ton. And now on to our last segment, the 3 things we like and don't quite like about Vela Bay. Starting first off with the 3 things we like. And on the first point that we like, it's being a first mover without the first mover risk. So take for example recent launches at Springleaf and One Marina Gardens, launches that were focusing a lot on this first mover advantage. I would say the buyers there require not just a little bit of balls, but also a little bit of imagination.
And as MSF, can you believe the balls this guy had?
It's because at this point in time, there's nothing very much there. So for someone who is logical and data driven like myself, I sometimes struggle to cross that bridge and require a lot more deeper analysis and zooming out and having a much better understanding on the macro perspective before I can have clarity on the exit strategy for those developments. And I can totally understand if layman consumers just can't see the clarity in the exit, and if you can't see a clarity in the exit, they typically associate that with risk. The Bayshore, however, is a little bit different. I like to call it a new town in a mature area. So the government essentially just cleared the forest at the tail end of the popular East Coast area and plonked in a new town. So it's not often that you get to enjoy being a first mover, but yet have clarity in terms of your exit thanks to proven demand data. So this is a bonus point. I'm not sure how many of you read the Bayshore write-up by URA on what their plans for this new Bayshore precinct. But over here, the first thing you'll notice is they expect to have 12,500. They estimate to have 12,500 dwelling units. Now this is bigger than the projected 9,000 units that's going to come out in Bidadari. While this write-up isn't as detailed as that of the Marina South transformation, there are still some pretty interesting points that I've seen. Of course, we have our typical marketing mumbo jumbo, but one of the interesting things is that this small precinct is actually serviced by 2 MRT stations. We have Bayshore and Bedok South MRT, and for those of you who don't know, the Bedok South MRT is going to have an integrated development that's going to come up right there to activate that whole area. And I don't think that it's going to take a long time to come up because they're going to need a shopping center there to service, all the new apartments that's going to pop up. You could just take Bidadari for example. and kind of time in line with how when Woodley Residences and the Woodley Mall open as a function of all the other BTOs hitting their MOP. Okay, so I don't think it's gonna take that long, maybe in a year or two's time. Okay, next up will be that 1 kilometer long main street with white pavements along the side to make it very enjoyable for walking and cycling, and they're gonna kind of link this whole thing over to East Coast Park. Similarly, some marketing mumbo jumbo, but over here I think it's very interesting, and this is kind of going to set it apart from the Marine Parade, the Amber side, where we all still have to take the underpass or a flyover over to East Coast Park. But it seems like they're going to design it in a way that it's going to be a seamless landscape bridge that brings you seamlessly over into East Coast Park. I thought this is gonna be quite interesting. Now moving on to the second thing we like about Vela Bay are the performances of the old 99-year condos in the vicinity. There's so many condos in that area that's older than me, condos like Lagoon View, Laguna Park, Neptune Court, Mandarin Gardens, Bayshore Park. They have all single-handedly defied all conventional wisdom about lease decay, performing, as well as some of the condos that's just a quarter of their age. Now here's the thing, nobody really starts their search with looking for these old 99-year condos. They try to start with something newer, either a freehold or a 99, but they soon come to realize that those are either too expensive or too small for their liking, but yet they really want to live in that area, hence they look for alternatives in that area and eventually land on some of these old 99-year condos. Now that just goes to show how much they really want to live in that area, so much so that they're willing to look past all the concerns of age, of lease decay. Hence, judging by the performances of all these old 99 years condo will tell you the demand of a particular area. That said, I've put all the caveats with regards to buying these older 99-year condos earlier on in the video. And on to our third and final point on what we like about Vela Bay are its supporting benchmark land prices. I know that sounds like a mouthful and a bit chim, but let me put it simply. The new Tanjong Rhu GLS will likely have to sell at close to 3,400 PSF. I know it's not exactly in the same district and it's much closer to town, but that's still a 10% premium. We then have the Bedok Rise GLS that's right beside Tanah Merah MRT that will also very likely come in at close to 3,000 PSF, and that's a little bit further away from East Coast Park. So Vela Bay's land was sold in the earlier part of 2025, and at that point in time that cost seemed astronomical. I mean, even today we have to accept that it's not cheap, okay? But I feel we are on the cusp of a huge spike in land cost, because take for example the recent land sale that was done in Lentor Gardens. It's almost 39% higher than the last piece of land sold in Lentor just last year. So now that's almost a 40% increase in land cost year on year. So it's a matter of when, not if, the government releases more land over at the Bayshore precinct, and assuming the government doesn't slam us with another round of cooling measures, it's very likely that the land cost for those new plots will be quite a fair bit higher than that as compared to Vela Bay. But at the very least, that new integrated development over at Bedok South should set the new benchmark prices for you and do for you like what Woodley Residences did for Park Colonial. Now moving on to the three things we don't quite like about Vela Bay, and point number one is its poor exit and gap score. So now let's take a look at how Vela Bay's score compares to some of the previous launches as well as the upcoming launches. So over in this sheet we have put up Vela Bay against the launches, the popular launches from last year, this year, Pinery, Viva Modern, as well as the big one that everybody is waiting for, Thomson View. So we have already done up our numbers for Thomson View and we've shared it with our exclusive clients. If that's something that interests you, feel free to drop us a text. We are happy to help you out over there. Okay, so for the two bedders, you see Vela Bay's exit score at 142%, perhaps being one of the highest ones, just maybe beating out Alta. Okay, so again, right, exit score you aim to have as low a score as possible. And in terms of its gap score, it beats out, it's better than Pinery, but again not as good as the rest of the developments. For three bedders, over here, coming back to the two bedders, what's surprising is that the profitability over in the Vela Bay area is almost the same as that over in the Thomson View area. But another interesting thing is that the highest achieved two-bedder prices are actually higher than that of what was the highest achieved as compared to the Thomson View area. And I boiled it down to the fact that in terms of Thomson View, the comparisons, there isn't really a lot of newer 99-year developments, but the median and average prices are actually really similar. Okay, so over here we have the 3-bedders, and in terms of 3-bedders, again, Vela Bay's 3-bedder score is not so good. Not so much about the profitability, but more so in terms of their supply coming off quite a fair bit, and we have already explained that earlier on in the video. And for 3-bedders, you can see for Thomson View, it's quite a fair bit more profitable in terms of highest achieved, and also average and median quantums is also better than that as compared to Vela Bay. In terms of gap score, Vela Bay's gap score actually similar, very similar to the Pioneer, and again, right, losing out to the rest of the other developments. Looking at the 4-bedders in terms of profitability at 5.2 is actually not all that bad. Again, losing out to the rest mainly in terms of supply ratio, okay, hence giving it a not so good exit score, losing out even to Viva Modern, but of course its gap score is way worse than Viva Modern, but still slightly better than Pioneer. Now, is that a deal breaker for us? Not necessarily. You just really have to understand the nuances in terms of the data and also consider some of the qualitative points. Again, putting that up onto the screen in terms of your purchase, and also it's important for you to understand your alternatives. Now, to the second point on what we don't quite like about Vela Bay are the lack of amenities in that area, as well as the potential disamenities. So let's talk about the disamenities first. So to the south, you have the highway. To the east and to the north, you have future construction coming up. Perhaps the best one already to avoid construction is the west. Obviously, then you have to deal with the west sun. So if you are looking to buy Vela Bay, you have to be prepared to live with that. Now, talking about the lack of amenities, there's honestly really nothing much there right now in terms of place for you to buy your groceries or places to eat. So you pretty much have to wait until either the Bedok South Integrated Development comes up, or some of the HDB BTOs hitting their TOB. They have some supermarkets or kopitiams over there. If not right now, nothing pretty much. You really have to go out, either go to Parkway, go to Bedok, or maybe go to Jewel. Now, to our third and final point on what we don't quite like about Vela Bay are its plus HDB flats. And for the simple reason, because these HDB flats have a 10-year MOP, so if you're looking for a shorter term exit, you will not be able to tap on them for potential HDB upgrader demand. But if you intend to hold on to your purchase for a little bit longer, then these plus flats can provide you with some of those HDB upgrader demand. And there's also one thing to note is that for plus flats, the owners are not allowed to rent out their flats even after the 10-year MOP. So your rental will be insulated and protected from the competition from these newer BTO flats. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. So if you'd like to check out Vela Bay, take a look at our research, or simply resonate with our systematic data-driven approach to portfolio planning, this is a quick look at our scope of services if you choose to work with us. Alright, feel free to drop us a text, we'll be happy to help you out. If not, till next time, bye bye.